Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that brings leadership into focus. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the Duke of Sussex. Despite some of the hot air, we're a carbon-neutral podcast, Your Highness, so I'm told. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We address everything from the controversy surrounding American chlorinated chicken to which events this week have made the political plot thicken, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Blunkett, former Home Secretary, former Education Secretary, and of course, the current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Mike LeGassick, the Director of Manning & Company, a long-established financial advice practice based in Ivybridge, Devon. They rely on the services of 15 self-employed advisors alongside 12 dedicated members of administrative staff. Mike has been part of its growth for 6 years, which we will discuss now. Mike, welcome.
Hi.
Thanks very much for joining us today. Now, as I've already mentioned, Manning & Co. has been going now for, well, over 3 decades, since 1988. Could you give the listeners a little bit of background to the firm to start with?
Yeah, it started with a guy called Steve Manning, who started the company off as a sort of one-man business, and then he took on a few sort of apprentices who subsequently took themselves through exams and built their knowledge and experience from the ground roots up. And like a lot of businesses, it's difficult to get it off the ground, much like a rocket, and then when it gets into up and out of the atmosphere, it's a perpetual motion. So a lot of the hard work and energy was in the early days before my time, and it's from that to where it is today is what I would say we're a medium-sized practice, with the total amount of advisors and administration staff is around about 20 people, and we cover pretty much every aspect of personal and commercial financial planning to assist people in achieving their objectives. And
all for a very picturesque part of the world.
Yeah, they say there's no place like home, but we are quite lucky to live down on the south coast. We're spoilt with coastline and moors, and yeah, it's a period in Devon and Cornwall, obviously, where many people aspire to retire. It's a lovely part of the world to live in. Absolutely.
Now, you've said, Mike, you've already touched on a few things there, but what do you think has been the success in making sure that, and correct me if I'm wrong here, actually, I should say, Mike, to the listeners, you've been with the business now for 7 or so years.
Yes.
And what would you say it has been that success, and once it's got off the ground in being such growing in the way it has?
It's not rocket science, really. I would say listening to what people have to say rather than just hearing them, but properly listening than hearing. There's two different things. And the reputation. We put a lot of work in securing strong relationships with clients. We're always available to talk. We try to keep clients updated with information that isn't boring, which is important to their own unique circumstances. And a regular client engagement, and the business is largely built on personal introduction and word-of-mouth referral, which is the way we would like it to be.
And I think that end point is certainly a key one when it comes to issues of finances. We're not naturally a country that finds it easy all the time to talk about those, so when there is a human face to that side of things, I think it's invaluable.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I had a meeting this morning, and for clients that have met me for the first time, And when you do the job as long as I've done it, which is approaching 27 years, it's quite easy to forget that it can be a daunting proposition to sit in front of a person you've never met in your life, who is going to assist you with one of the biggest decisions in your life, where you've got money to invest or you're looking at retirement, and you tend to take it for granted. I try not to. It sounds a bit woolly, but it's true. I do try to constantly remind myself that how would I feel if I was on the other side of that desk? Can I trust this person? Is he explaining things in a way that makes sense with me? Does it resonate? And above all else, do I believe I'm going to get a good lifetime outcome by engaging with this person? So initial meetings with our clients, particularly myself, is always a get to know you discovery meeting. I know lots of advisors use different terminologies for these types of meetings, but it really is do we feel we can work together?
Certainly something that is probably too far understated these days. And with that in mind, actually, looking at the sector more broadly, what would you say that the challenges that you'd identify that are raising their head at the moment?
Well, the challenges for me are constant. They're financial education and trust. At the end of the day, in any walk of life, if you are requiring a service from somebody, whether it be someone putting in a bathroom or servicing your car, and financial advice, you want to feel that you can trust that person. That's likability and trust sort of go hand in hand. Do I feel comfortable here? And are they credible in as much as they do know what they are talking about?
Go ahead.
No, I say those are I think those challenges are the challenges we've always faced and will continue to face. You never get a second opportunity to make a first impression. So if a client doesn't go away from that initial meeting thinking, I feel quite comfortable in that person's company, what they said made an awful lot of sense and it made me think about things I hadn't thought about before, most clients, if they're in a position to proceed, will generally follow up on that meeting. And financial education, as you know, is something that I am fiercely trying to pull together down this neck of the woods and across the profession as a whole, because it is really sadly lacking. People do not understand what they ought to understand from a basic understanding point of view, and it starts at education from perhaps secondary school education.
Exactly right. I know it's something you've written about before, Mike, and I think perhaps since you put it up, we should certainly talk about it. And let's start at the beginning, shall we? It is certainly a flaw of probably this country's system in that we don't address this when school children are going into secondary school. And I assume you would advocate for quite a robust system to be introduced for school children.
Oh, 100%. I've got a book coming out shortly called, sort of Your Money in Your Life, and it does touch on these aspects. It's not all about finance, because that would perhaps turn a lot of people off, but it's basically all the things I wish I'd known when I was about 20 that I've had to fall over and bump into to the point where I am now, where, experience is the one thing you get immediately after you needed it. You did it beforehand, it's one of those things. But no, education from a basic level, because when you take savings, for example, retirement savings, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to explain that the sooner you start, the better it'll be for you. And things like understanding the simple basic concept of compound interest. These things aren't really discussed at any level. They can say, look, just if you start small when you're younger and let time do its thing, and you look at long-term historic, what's happened over the last 100 years as far as things like conservative returns are, then you can show someone, look, a little early doors, and you do that for the next 20, 30, 40 years, can add up to a very substantial sum. But playing catch-up when it dawns on you when you're mid-40s and mid-50s is nigh on impossible for someone to make up the time. And it's things like compounding and starting early, and more importantly, having a real, true, unvarnished understanding of how the stock market works. If people could grasp that and understand it properly from an early age, I honestly believe there would be far better lifetime outcomes for clients, and complaints would fall like a stone. Because it comes down to education and managing people's expectations. And if you're not managing clients' expectations, that's where you run into trouble.
And I'm sure it's true of, and as you suggested, it's whilst of course we're strictly talking about finance, the broader point is one of principle, isn't it? If you are not taught something from an early-ish age, and that could be anything from maths to cricket, you are far less likely to be interested to learn or understand it when you are older.
Yes, and my dad, who's sadly departed, said something that always sticks in my mind, and he said, "As the twig bends, so grows the tree." So if you start off on the wrong tack, it's hard to get back on track. Whereas if those seeds are sowed early, and you understand how the basic fundamentals of, like, say, investing works, it's going to stand you in so much good stead, save you thousands and thousands of pounds in money and time by learning at an earlier age, rather than having light bulb moments when it could be considered to be almost too late.
Absolutely. And if you and I do ask all the guests this, maybe it's a bit unfair putting you on the spot, but let's say you get to be Secretary of State for the day, and you get to your magic wand, and you get to change one area of policy. I think I might have guessed the answer, but what is it you would do to fundamentally perhaps reform the system on a practical level that would help both clients and the sector more generally?
It would be financial education. I just think it's terribly, sadly lacking. What they teach at school, I mean, I celebrated 38 years in June that I didn't have to use algebra. So 38 years has gone by and I still haven't had to use it.
Are you telling me you've not worked out what an isosceles triangle is recently either?
Not really, no. My view on education, I wouldn't say it's radical, I think a lot of people believe this, is as you get a bit older, when you get to an age where you sort of have an idea of what you think you want to aspire to or to become, I think the education should be focusing more in those areas that you want to move into, rather than dictating on something that you will never ever use, because it doesn't engage people, it turns them off, they're not interested. Like any subject matter, if you're interested in it, you will absorb that information. If you're not interested in it, it's like you're either a stone or a sponge. If you're not interested in the subject, you're a stone. If you're a sponge, you soak it all up. So I think there should be more room for manoeuvre. I know it has evolved since I left school, but I think there should be more room for manoeuvre to assist and help young people in an area that they feel they're going to be finding their career in.
Yes, and I think that those two fantastic points. First of all, it was only, I think, earlier this year, which really has emphasised the practical element of this. I think it was UCL and Cambridge University who came out with a report that about 1 in 3 adults in the country are unable to work out correct change on a shopping trip. That's clearly an indictment of how we teach children basic practical financial skills, and then the broader piece which you've brought up. And when so many more people are going to probably find their careers in this, it's just better for everybody. How have you found that in terms of, in fact, recruitment policy and younger people themselves coming into the job market? Have you found their skills to be up to scratch?
Yes and no. We've had mixed experience in that. Another thing I would say is that one thing that's sadly lacking in school, in my opinion, is they don't teach you how to go to work. At school, you can generally get away with a lot. So if you put in haphazard homework, or it's a bit late, or it's not really up to the standard, if you believe that you can sort of get away with those standards, you have a rude awakening when someone's paying you a wage. They will not withstand you turning up at 9:05. They won't withstand you dropping work in at 10 o'clock in the morning when it should have been in 5, not the previous evening. So that they don't teach people, say, look, guys, while you're at school, there is a fair bit of give and take, but you will not experience this when someone's paying you to do a job. So that they don't teach you how to go to work. I never remembered having any of that when I was in my education. I speak to younger people today and I throw that question in and they say, well, what do you mean teach you to go to work? So clearly it would appear to me, at least in my experience, that this type of education, this type of, look guys, wake up and smell the roses, houses, you're going to go into the big wide world. You just won't get away with what you've got away with here for the last 5 years. No. Just teaching people that there are certain standards that will be expected upon them might just stand them in good stead for when they do have to find gainful employment.
And I think with, from what I hear this end of things, there is a movement now that finally is being listened to, and I think that will be changing. Whether it's too late for a lot of people, it may well be. Looking towards the future, Mike, a little bit more now. How do you see that? And of course, the question again, whether education can keep up with it, especially with what will become the ever more importance of technology for the sector. How do you see that panning out?
Well, we call it robo-advice in our profession, which means that for the millennials, you can do everything with a few presses of a button on a mobile phone, and there will certainly be a market for that. There's no doubt about that. I wouldn't really say it's a threat. I still believe most people want to see the whites of your eyes, and technology can only do so much. It can only answer the questions that you put into it. It's not quite advanced to the point where it can expand on answers that you give. And when you sit in front of a client, they may come in with one idea, but when you've expanded on their thought process, it often goes to other avenues where they think, oh, do you know what, I'm glad you mentioned, because I'd never considered that. Whereas pressing buttons won't enable you to do that. No, technology, no doubt, and AI will no doubt increase dramatically, as it has been doing. But I think all places in financial services, and probably business in general, it has its place. There will always be people that want to see the whites of your eyes and then look across the table to you, and there will always be those group of people that are happy to do everything by pushing buttons on a keyboard, click of a mouse, and close the phone on the mobile phone lid. So technology will certainly assist in our profession. We've seen this now.
Yes.
Over the last 10 years, there's been a huge downward pressure, almost you could call a race to the bottom, on investment fund and management charges. So the companies that run and invest money on our clients' behalf, those charges have been dropping dramatically, and that's down to two things largely: an ever-increasing competitive marketplace, which is always good, and secondly, technology on the one hand is a good thing in as much as it does things quickly en masse, but unfortunately the second part of that's probably resulted in a lot of job losses from people that would otherwise have had to manually input that bits of information and data.
It's going to be an interesting balancing act, and one that we'll find out the answer to probably quite soon on that for us. Now, with looking at the clock, I think it would probably be remiss of us if we didn't, if we are feeling up to it, at least discussing what is currently passing for politics in the country at the moment. We get a lot of, perhaps this is the best way to tackle it is this way. We certainly hear a lot over here about how, we had a certain referendum, which you might be aware of, 3 years ago, and for better or for worse, we have not had an answer to the result yet. Have you found that degree of uncertainty about the failure of perhaps some elements of our politics to act out a decision, one way or the other again, to have had an effect on the market?
Probably on the market to a degree as far as businesses don't know whether to stick or twist. Everyone in life wants certainty. No one likes the unknown. We all like certainty. We all want to know what we're going to do, where things are going to go. It's just a human trait that we want certainty. I've listened to both sides of the story, as everyone knows. We've all had millions of conversations and so on and so forth. My view is we voted out, let's get on with it and make the best of it. And that's my own view. We have had clients, only a couple of clients that have said to me, do you think we should move into cash for the time being? I will never make that decision for a client or take on that responsibility, because I cannot call the market or time the market. And you'd be damned if you do and damned if you don't. Warren Buffett, probably the most successful investor that's ever lived, who I believe is 87 now, and he's worth $100 billion.
He's done all right, then. himself, yes.
He has done right for himself. But he maintains to this day, he cannot tell you what the market's going to do today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, and he's not interested because he is a long-term investor. Now, we have had some people say, well, it's all right for him, he's worth 100 billion. I say, well, yes, but how do you think he got the 100 billion? He started out with nothing, and he has been what you call a long-term investor. Nobody can time the market. So of the clients, of the one or two people that have mentioned, oh, it's a bit unusual out there at the moment, what should we do? My plan for them, my advice to them is to stick with the plan. See, human nature is a failed investor. We are not hardwired to be good investors because we have an incredible amount of biases that we have, but then the ones that you don't know about are the worst ones. And we've got biases, and our behavior around money is irrational. And I do partly blame the media for this because if there's bad news financially, if the market dips by 5 to 10%, momentarily, it's front page news and it's headline news, and that scares people. It scares people. And we live off sensationalism, press and media, which I never can get my head around. But if you come home on a Friday, kick your shoes off, and you've got money invested, and it says 10 billion wiped off the stock market today, that will panic a lot of people.
Absolutely.
What they don't say is, by the way, 22 billion wiped on the stock market in the last few years. No, but that's not. They don't want to give that impression.
There's no context.
Right, so this comes back to financial education, no context, because an educated client who understands how these things work, that has had their position managed, their expectations managed, they'll know that these things happen from time to time. It really annoys me when I sometimes hear advisors saying to a client, your investments might go down as well as up, like they could fall as well as rise. I tell every single client of mine that if they're invested for a reasonably long time, and I'm saying 5 to 10 years and beyond, I categorically tell them that their investments, not if, not might, not could, they are going to fall in value from time to time. Not might, they're going to.
Yeah.
Now when that happens, the phone doesn't ring. Because they don't say, oh, you never told me that could happen. So, we had this discussion, and now's one of those times. The boxer Mike Tyson came out with a great saying years ago, and it really works well in financial services. Even though I will tell a client, say, look, stick with the plan, these things, oh, yeah, I get it, Mike, I get it, I understand these things can happen, I know, until it happens. And Mike Tyson said years ago, everyone who steps into the ring with me has got a plan until they get punched in the face. And then it flies out the window. So we've always got to constantly apply a serum, the antidote to the client's fears, by constantly re-educating them. Telling them once is not good enough. I've got to keep hitting them home, saying that we discussed these things can happen. So I know this subject is really largely around education, but in 26 years in doing this job, if I'm really being brutally honest with you, I could probably say, in my experience, only about 10% of the people I've ever dealt with truly understand how the stock market works. The rest of them have got a reasonable idea, and most of them have no idea.
But yes.
And if you're coming from a position of no idea, it's a very dangerous place, because when clients come in to speak to me, I say they come in with a suitcase full of M&Ms, not the chocolates, but it's misunderstanding and misconceptions. Now, if you come in with £500,000 of your retirement pot to invest for the rest of your life, and you thought that a stock market crash means I lose all my money, then you're coming from a position of misinformation. You're going to make some bad decisions. Yes. Ignorance. So until you lay the platform of, well, no, that's not really the case if you're highly diversified. The only way you could lose all of your money in a highly diversified, competitively priced contract with one of two scenarios. One would be an asteroid hitting planet Earth, and two would be someone pressing the nuclear button, because it would be bets off anyway, game over anyway. Right? But that's unlikely to happen. And if it did, well, we've all got bigger problems.
Well, I'm conscious now we're very near to the end. Maybe given all that we've talked about here, it might be fitting then if I were to end with what is it you would say to think about the clients at the moment? What is it you would say to young people, maybe those still in school, finishing school, looking for a career in what you do? What advice is it you'd give to them right now for their future?
Find a mentor, or more than one. I would strongly encourage it. Look for people that you believe have got a good reputation, that are upstanding in the community. They've been around for a while. They've seen things come and go. Don't ever go with the hot topic at the moment, what's doing right now. Look for someone who's been around a while, that's seen good times and bad times. And if I could encourage them, I'd say, look, we try and weed people out in your community that you respect and admire, that as far as you can understand, and any research you might have done, they've got a pretty good reputation. And then make contact with those people. If you really want to go old school, something that would absolutely blow them away is a handwritten letter, because we don't get handwritten letters. If you receive a handwritten letter through your door box, in your letterbox, and it's not printed, it's a handwritten address.
You are going to read it.
You are going to read that letter because it's most unusual. So that would be the best way. At least make contact and say, look, I'm about to start my career. I know you've been successful in business for many years. Is there any chance that you would mind sparing me some time just to put straight on a few things, some pearls of wisdom that you think stand the test of time, rather than me finding out through trial and error and looking back and thinking, well, what all the time I wasted. That's the number one thing I would say, is try to find one or two mentors, because most people are genuine. Although they might be busy, you'd have to be a bit of a hard heart not to find some time to speak to someone who sought you out for some very important advice from an early age.
I think fantastic advice. Mike, the book is How to Get a Better Return on Your Life and Your Money. When is there a date for release?
I'm finishing the second edit at the moment with my copywriter, and I'm hopeful that he will have some news for me next week. But from a timeline point of view, to get it completely finished and what I've got on my plate, I think it's probably going to be January before it's out, January next year.
Well, maybe we can certainly speak again when it's on its way to print.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. I really would.
Mike, thank you very much for joining us.
All right, that's great. Good speaking to you. Thank you ever so much.
Goodbye. I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Mike, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Manning & Co are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, David Blunkett. Lord Blunkett served as Home and Education Secretary in the Tony Blair Cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2015. Outside of politics, he's the Vice President of the Royal National Institute of Blind People, the National Alzheimer's Society, and when he has the time, he can be found cheering on his team, Sheffield Wednesday. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to David. Here it is now. We're now joined by Lord Blunkett. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Now, it would probably be remiss of me if I didn't start, given the recent events in Parliament. I didn't ask you, given your 32 years in that place, about your thoughts regarding the unprecedented situation I think the public are looking at the minute.
Well, I think I see it very much like Joe Public. I see it as though I'm looking at something that is made up, that is scripted, that is like almost a sci-fi film where anything can happen and then anything does happen. And I'm very sad about that, because I think that it's damaged our parliamentary democracy. I think that it's brought politics into disrepute, and I think it's created anger on all sides, whether people were strongly in favour of remaining or whether they were, as we call them, Brexiteers.
Absolutely. And given that situation, whether it's going to be a general election, many people are beginning to worry about how apathy taking effect.
Well, I'm worried about two things. Apathy in the respect of turnout and whether people vote, and anger and, if you like, the friction developed into a failure to be able to have a democratic dialogue, so that the respect that we have for each other, that the way in which we debate issues is often now broken down, and there's abuse in the street, not just of people because they're considered to be different or foreign, but because people recognise they have a different point of view. Now, that is new. I've been around in formal politics now for, goodness, almost all my adult life, because I was elected to a local authority in my city of Sheffield when I was 22. And I've never seen that. I've seen people get very annoyed, and that's fine, and people should get angry, but I've never experienced them display it in such personal venom before. And we need to calm that, because our democracy depends on people being able to have genuine disagreements and differences and to work them through the political process. Otherwise, we fall, as history teaches us, into the hands of extremists.
Absolutely. And given that you've just said what you just said, a lot of people are talking now about whether the party structure, which does exist at the minute, it can survive. We've seen both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party showing signs of buckling.
I think the political system the party system will survive. It may have a very rocky time in the near future, but I think it'll right itself. But it will only do that if political parties themselves sort out what's going on internally. I think both major parties have been, to use an old phrase, infiltrated. I came across a prominent minister just outside the cabinet whose current chair of their Conservative Association was the UKIP candidate against him back in 2015. We know about the challenges within the Labour Party and the way in which people who were thrown out of the party have either been able to or are seeking to rejoin. And so we've got this two-ender, if you like, the bread at the two sides of the sandwich coming together, and the middle is being squeezed. Now, there's academic work to say that actually the electorate aren't all that keen on centre parties, particularly at the moment. And I think we need to be wary of believing that the creation of some sort of centrist party in Britain would solve the problem. It would temporarily, but it wouldn't resolve the differences that people have and how we work them through.
A lot of people have been suggesting recently that the only way out of this situation is with a second referendum. And I write in saying that you have quite reluctantly come to that position yourself.
It took me a very long time to come to the conclusion that we would need an affirmative vote. I resisted it because I come from and represented an area deeply disaffected, feeling the effects of deindustrialization and then the austerity measures on the back of the global meltdown, and felt in my bones, which is why I wasn't one of those who thought we were easily going to win the referendum for Remain in 2016, that you need to deal with the underlying problems and causes of that disaffection. And the simple slogan, "They didn't hear you the first time, tell them again," could be very effective, a kind of Trumpian slogan that could be adopted by those who are very, very vehement Brexiteers. However, I think given the state that we're in, I came to the conclusion a few weeks ago, and I wrote in the Daily Telegraph, that I think the only way to deal with this is to get an agreement for this interim period, because that's what it is, a transition from where we are to where we might be, and then put that to the British people. And if the British people don't like that negotiated agreement, either Theresa May's original or something that emerges from the discussions and the debate and the toing and froing between the two major parties, put that to the electorate and give them a chance 3 years on from 2016 to make a new choice as to whether that's what they want to go for, that's the direction they want to take, or whether they'd like to take a step back and remain in the European Union.
And do you think that the people of Sheffield that did vote leave, many of whom voting for the first time in decades or the first time ever, do you think that they would feel maybe slightly frustrated at the call for a second vote?
Yes, I think they would. And I think we just have to be really honest about that. There would be a great deal of frustration, bordering on anger, people saying, we gave you the message, Why didn't you just do it? And we have to be straight with them. The reason it's been complex, the reason it's taken this time, the reason that we are in the undoubted mess we're in, is because it wasn't simple. You didn't, as some people thought, sign a bit of paper and walk away. This is a complex, interconnected, economically, socially, in terms of our trade and our relationships, not just within the European Union, but with the European Union's agreements across the world. This is a complex issue. And to pretend otherwise is not to give people what they want. It's to patronize them and say, yes, we don't think you were wrong. We don't think that you got it wrong when you thought it was a simple way out. I think you just have to be straight with them, and they'll be angry. I mean, people are angry with me when I walk around in my own constituency and say, what are you up to? And I say, I'm up to trying to speak the truth. I'm up to trying to say it as it is, as I always have done.
Absolutely. Now, given all of that, one would expect the governing party to perhaps be somewhere between 20 points and to 30 points behind the opinion polls, but they are not. There has been an awful lot of criticism of the leadership of the opposition regarding that. Would you have any advice for the leadership of your party?
Well, I think belatedly, from the beginning of April, the two parties realised that they were going to sink separately if they didn't actually try and make an effort and at least display some endeavour to work together. I think had there been two different leaders post-2016 referendum, this would have happened a great deal earlier. It hasn't, but it can now. And it is remarkable that in the circumstances that the government have found themselves, not just in not being able to get the kind of deal that some people wanted, not even being able to hold all their party together, but actually being totally riven publicly with cabinet responsibility having broken down, to find themselves only marginally behind, or even on opinion polls through March, marginally in front of the Labour Party is astonishing. And once this period is over, I think Labour will need to take a very long, hard look at why the British people have not turned, as they often do, to what is called Her Majesty's opposition. There are very complex reasons for that, including the fact that the leadership of the party have only realised, I think, very, very recently, that you have to reach out to people whose views you don't agree with, and you have to win them over to something more than the issues and the policies and the ideology you thought of in the first place.
And on that point, you'll be aware, certainly, that the Parliamentary Review itself has been dedicated to showcasing leadership in all its forms across the country. Now, speaking to many of our contributors, they have made clear that they do feel that leadership has been lacking, both from the government and opposition, as you've said. In your many years in politics, is there a time in certainly recent history where there has been perhaps a leadership vacuum like we're seeing today?
I think we find in Britain an interesting paradox. People want strong leaders, but they want leaders that listen and are responsive. And the two don't always go together. I've lived through the period of both Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, two leaders who knew what they wanted to do and were prepared to put it on the line. I've lived through Ted Heath and John Major, who were less clear. Ted Heath on Europe, yes, but not on much else. John Major really trying to mop up after the controversial and divisive Thatcher era, where they showed a different style of leadership. Now, they were portrayed as being weak. I don't think that's always the case. I think that you can have leaders who are very clear what they want to do, but to turn on its head the Marxist slogan, speak softly and walk with a big stick, they can actually do the job clearly and decisively. Clem Attlee was such a person, and in many ways so is Harold Macmillan. And those are the kind of leaders where you don't get bombast, you don't get I know best and I'm going to push this through, but you actually get someone who can genuinely create a coalition of the willing, but has a clear idea about their values. And I hope we'll return to that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the strengths of the review has always been its sense of bipartisanship.
Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it, and therefore to get the message that they've got to reflect outwards. We need both. We need the input into the system. We need voices. We need ideas. We need experiences through Parliamentary Review inwards, but we also need to ensure that the way in which our politics works is reflected outwards, so that people firstly understand how the system works, secondly, the complexity and difficulty of it, and thirdly, the way in which they need to tell us, I mean, I'm in the upper house now, but to tell us as parliamentarians what they think and where we're going wrong, and for us to listen.
Absolutely. And on that point, you've been in public service for most of your life, Lord Blunkett, ever since Sheffield City Council. I mean, in that time, what are the key lessons you think you've learned in the best way for policymakers and those at the coalface to communicate and work together?
I've learned that actually there is enormous wisdom out there, and if you're prepared to engage and to listen, then your views might actually change. Mine have on a number of issues, particularly social issues, what small L liberal issues over the years, going in the opposite direction, it has to be said, to most people as they age. And you need to ensure that you've reached out to sufficient people to create that coalition that allows you to make progress, and that you won't create everything you want and change everything you want for the better overnight. It will never happen. There's no days where everything's done and we can all wash our hands of it, and that's fine. We build building blocks. We stand, if you like, historically on the shoulders of those who came before us. And if we get that message, we won't be too frustrated when everything doesn't happen immediately, but we'll be determined to make progress, and we'll punish politically, democratically, those who don't.
Absolutely. And perhaps finally, with that concluding point, it's fair to say, as you've already mentioned, a lot of the population are frustrated, no matter how they vote in the referendum or their general political opinions. But perhaps, for those people, is there something you'd point to be optimistic, looking towards the future about?
I think I'm very clear. We're a great nation. We can't just do things on our own. We have to recognise that we live in an incredibly rapidly growing global environment, and the power sources and the power politically has changed over the last 20, 30 years. But we are creative, we are innovative, and we will pull through, and we'll do it because we won't have anyone else to blame anymore if we come out of the European Union, and we'll need to literally pull our socks up and do it ourselves. In the end, my message is clear. Nothing is ever as good as it seems at the time, and nothing is ever as bad. And we've come through difficult times in the past, and we'll come through again.
Lord Blunkett, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Red Lion to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by guests in each podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guests on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit our website at www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.